Okay, so I have this box full of thrifted materials. There's curtains, bed sheets, pillowcases, tablecloths, you name it. I am going to try and turn some of these scraps into something cute and useful. And what I mean by that is I have no measurements at all, but I do know the rough size that I want the tote bag to be. It definitely must include some ruffles, handles. I probably want to put a patch pocket inside, and it must have a cute little tie at the top to close it. Having a look at all of my thrifted fabrics, I actually think I'm going to be going for a curtain, which is a scrap I have left over from a previous project. I'm going for the curtain because it is a heavier weight material, and I think it will hold up really well for the outside of my tote bag. Now to pick the lining, which color is going to go best? So I have these blue tones, burgundy, peachy tones, as well as green. I've pulled this mint green and this light pink, which I think go really well with the curtain fabric, but I don't know which one I should go for. I think I'm probably gonna go for the green. I want this bag to be large enough to fit just my book, my mobile, and my house keys for when I take my daughter to her karate lessons. I'm going to be using the book where I keep all the records of my sewing projects as a guide to how large I want the bag to be. I'm going to be placing my book roughly about there, and I'm going to take my ruler and my piece of chalk and measure around the book. I want there to be just enough space for the book to not be so tight inside the bag, but it has a little bit of wiggle room. I think by adding 2 inches on each side of the book will give enough space for the seam allowance as well as enough space for the thickness of the book. And that looks like it should be perfectly fine. So I'm going to be adding 2 inches around all the edges of the book, and I'm going to be cutting out 2 of the same size for the outer shell of my bag. My fabric does have a bit of a print on it, and actually having a look at it now, I think I may want to center this on my panel instead of just having it off to the side, which if I cut it as it is, my design is going to be slightly off to the side. So I'm just going to be measuring what I drew out, and I'm just going to shift it slightly so that I can have this in the center. I am just going to be using this pattern repeat over here to align my ruler so that I could get the top edge straight, and then I'm going to be measuring from there. But this actually looks skew. Let me have a look at the print from the other side. Okay, so I think the curtains have actually been sewed skew themselves, because I can see from that edge it's pretty different from this edge over here. One is higher than the other. I think I am just going to have to go back and redraw, and instead of using these side ones now that I drew as a guide, I am first going to draw the top line so that I can align the print, and then I will draw the sides straight. I think that looks fine now. I have drawn out my square. It looks slightly skewed, but I'm just going to go with it. If anything, I will just fix it while I am stitching. And now I'm just going to cut following these lines, hoping that I actually cut out the correct lines. Pattern piece number 1 is cut out, and I think that looks pretty okay, pretty straight. Now I'm just going to use this as a template, and I'm going to cut out another one of these for the other side of the outer bag, and then I'm also going to cut out 2 more for the interior, so to use as the lining, and I'm cutting it out of this green bed sheet. I think it will actually look really cute if I have both sides matching, so having the exact same print on both front and back. So I'm going to try and match this up and cut it out exactly the same. This is the best I can match this up, because I don't actually think the print is even straight, or it might just be because I haven't actually ironed my fabric out. So either the print is not straight, or it's my fault for not ironing the fabric, but I'm just going to go with it and cut it out like this, because in reality, who is going to be looking at both sides of the bag at the same time? Okay, so I have the 4 layers of the inner and outer bag, so 2 lining and 2 main, and I want to cut a patch pocket out of the green mint fabric as well. I just want to decide now how big I want that pocket to be, but probably just enough to slip either my keys and my phone, or make it actually just the size of my phone. I think will be a better quite a bit. I actually have some offcuts here from a previous project, so I'm just going to use this. I actually think I will cut this full length and just straighten out the edges here, but that looks like to be the perfect size for it. And this is going to be on the inside of the bag. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch seam allowance on the side. Actually, let me just add slightly a bit more, and that seems to be good. So I'm just going to cut this and straighten out all the edges now. And now I have 2 pieces for my interior patch pocket. I'm going to set that one aside, and now what I want to add are some handles. I wanted to have longer handles. I don't want the bag to be sitting up in my armpit with the bulk of the book, so I'm probably thinking I wanted to hang somewhere around my waist, maybe even slightly smaller. So I'm just going to use a measuring tape to decide how long I want the handles to be. I have measured my handles to be about 28 inches long, and I think I want them to be about probably 1.5 inches wide. Or is that too much? Now I'm going to go down to 1.25 inches wide, and I'm going to multiply that measurement by 4 because I'm going to fold it in like you would make bias binding. So 1.25 times 4, that's going to equal to 5 inches. So I'm going to be cutting out my handle 28 by 5 inches wide. I'm going to straighten the edges of the end of the fabric here first, and I know that this is a straight line here because I use it for another project. So I'm going to use this edge here as a guide and just chop off the end for a straight line. Now I'm going to mark out the 5-inch width for the straps, and I'm going to connect the dots, then cut it out. Okay, so now I have 2 handles. I'm going to set this aside, and now I want to think about those tiny little ties that I want to have at the top of the bag to close them off. I think I want the ties to be roughly 1/2 inch wide. So again, because I'm going to be folding them in like bias binding, so 1/2 inch times 4, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, so it's going to be 2 inches, and I'm going to cut out 2 strips 2 inches wide and roughly about 7 inches long, and that should give me enough just to tie it off and make a little bow at the top. Now I want to decide how long I need to cut my ruffle out. So I do know that I want it to stick out by 2 inches, and now I need to figure out how long I need to cut my piece of fabric. So I need to cut it 2 inches plus seam allowance, which I'm gonna have 1/2 inch seam allowance, or maybe 1/4 inch. So 2 inches plus a seam allowance, so 2 1/4, we double that, so that's gonna be 4.5 inches wide by, I'm gonna measure now the perimeter of the whole bag, but I need to take into consideration that if I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I don't want my ruffle to be in the seam allowance at the top. So I'm going to start measuring my seam allowance 1/2 inch below the top of the bag from both sides and decide on the length then. So from here to here is 10.5, so this side should be 10.5 as well. So that is 21 inches plus 15, so 21 and 15, that's 36. But now if I cut it out that size, it's going to be just flat. So I want to add more fabric onto it so that there's gathers. So I'm going to add about half of this measurement onto it to give me gathers but not over gathered. So I'm going to cut a strip out which is going to measure 54 inches by 4.5 inches. So I actually don't have enough of this length of fabric to accommodate the width of 2 of my ruffles. So what I'm going to do is just unpick the hem, and then I'll definitely have enough. So once I unpick the hem, then I'll measure out my handles and cut them out. Now that that's unpicked, I have definitely enough width to be able to cut out the 4.5 inch wide strips. I'm probably gonna be better off pressing this crease out of it before I start drawing out the shape that I want. Finally, I have all of my pattern pieces cut out. I have one ruffle, 2 pieces for the handles, 2 pieces for my patch pocket, 2 pieces for the ties for the top of the bag, and then 4 for the main parts of the bag. So 2 pieces of lining and 2 for the exterior bag. Now we can finally start sewing. I like to do all of my sewing in batches, so I'm going to clip all the pieces that need sewing now, and then I'll stitch them at the same time on my sewing machine. I am going to be placing the exterior panel, so the 2 outer panels from the curtain fabric, right sides together, and I'm going to clip these in place, but only down the sides and the bottom, because I think I want to have this as my top. I'm going to set this one aside, and I'm going to do exactly the same for the lining. Because I don't have a print on the lining and there's no right or wrong side, I'm just going to clip them together as they are. So again, just down the sides and the bottom. Then for my patch pocket, I'm actually going to clip around all 4 sides, but I'm going to leave a little opening because I want to be able to turn this the right way out. So I'm going to place some pins here to remind me that that is where I want to leave my opening, but I am going to clip the rest. Now I'm going to press my ties, my handles and my ruffle in place so that I can clip them and sew them at the same time as the other pieces. So I can see my handles have a bit of stretch and I don't want them over time to kind of droop or sag. So what I'm actually going to do is cut a strip of interfacing just to press it on, not the full length, just a little one, about 1.25 inches width, just to give it that extra bit of stability. Okay, here's one strip for that one, and I'm just going to cut out another one. And I like to keep all these little pieces of scraps because I tend to piece them together for other projects. And even though I cut this one skew, it is still going to work. So I'm just going to include that in my cut. Okay, and piece number 2. The first thing I'm going to do is press my handles in half so that I can get a center crease, and that is going to be my guide to then place the interfacing up against that center crease. Now on interfacing, one side has glue on it and the other side is quite smooth. So if you're applying interfacing, always make sure that the glue side is down on the fabric, because if that hits your iron, the heat is going to melt it and you could be destroying your iron with it. So make sure that the glue side is down, and I am placing it up against this center crease here. And now I'm going to refold it. I'm going to press that center crease again, and then I'm going to open it up and press the raw edges now to meet that middle crease. So just opening it up and folding it in like that, and then pressing it again. Now for the other side, folding that in to meet the center and pressing this one in place as well. Now for the last fold, I'm just going to fold it in half, so the folded edges are now matching, and one last press, and I'm clipping it together so that it doesn't come undone. Right, so that's now done, and I'm going to set it to the side. I'm going to be repeating the exact same thing for the other handle, and then for the ties, I'm going to be doing the same process, as in folding it in half and then folding the raw edges, but I'm not going to be adding interfacing for those. And now for the ruffle, I'm only going to press it in half once. Since the short edges of the ruffle are actually going to be exposed and not be hidden in a seam, I'm actually going to turn this right sides together and clip it in place and sew down over here. And while we are at it, I'm going to be giving my main pieces a good press as well, because I see they've got lots of creases in them. And now to choose what thread I want to use. I have a light blue, a light green, and like a terracotta. I'm actually not too keen on how the blue one or the green one is looking on the fabric, and I think I'm going to go for the terracotta one. It's also going to give it a bold top stitching, so I'm going to have to make sure that my top stitching is on point. Otherwise it's going to look a bit messy with such a strong color. I'm not going to change to my terracotta just yet. What I'm going to do is sew the short ends of my ruffle first and then sew the gathering stitches with the cotton that I already have in my sewing machine. It is a blue color, but because I'm going to be removing the gathering stitches later, it doesn't make a difference. I'm using a 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm going to align the raw edge of my fabric with the 1/4 inch mark on my needle plate. Now I've sewn the 2 short edges on my ruffle. I am going to turn them the right way out. So I'm just folding in that corner and flipping it out like that and giving it a bit of a wiggle so that I have a sharp corner. Now to gather my fabric, I'm going to lengthen my stitch length to a 5 and I'm going to sew 2 gathering stitches to make them as even as I can so I can spread them out nicer just now. Make sure at the beginning and end of your row of gathering stitches that you leave about 10 centimeters of extra thread on each end so that you have something to pull on. I'm going to be sewing the first row of my gathering stitches 1/8 of an inch away from the raw edge, and I'm going to sew the second row 3/8 of an inch away from the raw edge. My gathering stitches are now done and I'm going to set this aside for now and change the color of my thread. For my handles and my ties, I'm going to lower my stitch length now to a 3 and I'm going to be sewing 2 rows of stitches about 1/8 of an inch away from each of the folded edges. My top stitching is done. I think it looks pretty good. They are all straight and I have no skipped stitches. Then I'm going to grab my main exterior panel and I'm going to sew around 3 edges using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I am going to reduce my stitch length again, this time now to a 2.4, which is kind of the standard stitch length you would use for construction. I was just about to make a mistake and I'm so glad I caught myself. Let me show you. I was just about to sew these 2 together without putting my ruffle in between. So first I'm going to remove the clips around the edges and separate these panels and then grab my ruffle to gather it in. To gather my ruffle, I am grabbing 2 threads which are on one side, so on the top side, and I'm going to pull them at the same time one way while pulling the fabric in the other way. Now that I have gathered my ruffle to the length of the outside of my main panel, I am going to tie off the thread so that the ruffles don't come undone when I adjust them now. The gathers are evenly spread out now, and when I attach it to the main panel, I need to keep in mind that I want to add the ruffle 1/2 inch below the top of the bag because I don't want the edge of the ruffle to be caught in the seam at the top. So I'm going to measure 1/2 inch down from the top and start clipping my ruffle from there. Clip it right around the one side, the bottom, up the other side, and again leave 1/2 inch of space at the top. My ruffle is now clipped in place, and to keep it there, I'm going to sew between these 2 rows of stitches on the sewing machine, and then I'm going to add the second main exterior panel over it, sandwiching the ruffle in between, and then I'll be stitching those 2 together at a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. Now that these are all sewn together, I'm going to clip off the corners to reduce the bulk, and I actually want to turn it the right way out just to have a sneak peek at what the bag is looking like now. I actually think it's looking really cute and I'm very excited to see this bag finished now. I'm going to remove all the gathering stitches, which is the blue thread that I have left over, because it's visible. So I'm just going to remove it all around the 3 edges and move on to the next step. All of the gathering stitches are now out, and I'm going to turn the bag wrong side out. I'm going to be putting the handles and the ties in position, and I'm going to work out where I want them. So I don't want the handles to be too wide, but I also don't want them to be too close. I am thinking somewhere around here should be okay. So that is about 3 1/4 inches in from the side. Just going to line them up and see if I actually like that. I think that's going to work out well. Okay, so I'm going to use that measurement, 3/4 and 1 inch in from the side, and I'm going to clip them in place. And now for the tie, I'm going to find the center point between the handles and clip it in place, but just one edge. Now for the other side, I'm not going to measure again. I'm just going to use what I have clipped in place as a reference and match those up. I'm going to head back onto the sewing machine and just stitch these all in place to secure them, and then I will be able to move on to the interior of the bag. Those are now all stitched in place, and I'm going to set this main part of the bag out the way, and I'm going to change my thread because I'm going to be working with the interior and I don't want the orange thread to be that visible. So I'm going to change out my orange thread and go for a light green color to stitch the interior. For the patch pocket, I'm going to be stitching right around, but I'm going to be leaving a space unstitched between my pins because I want to be able to turn it inside out. As I was stitching the patch pocket, I remembered it would have been easier if I had added the patch pocket to one of my linings before stitching the linings together. So I'm not going to unpick anything, I can still work with this. It's just going to be a little bit more fiddly. But for now, I'm going to cut off all the corners on my lining as well as my patch pocket, turn my patch pocket right way out, and then I'm going to measure where I want it to go on my lining. My patch pocket is now pressed and ready. For me to center it on my lining, I'm going to fold my lining in half and give it a little bit of a finger press to create a crease. And I'm going to fold the patch pocket in half as well to find the center crease of the patch pocket. Then I'm going to measure roughly 2 inches down from the top because I don't want the patch pocket to be right at the edge. I want it to be a little bit lower, and I think 2 inches below the top should be just enough. For the patch pocket, I want to make sure that I leave this opening at the bottom because I'm going to top stitch around all 3 corners. When I go past the bottom, it's going to be closing this opening, whereas if I leave it at the top, that opening will always be there. So I'm going to make sure that I have the opening facing towards the bottom of my bag. Now I'm going to align the center crease of my patch pocket with the center crease of my bag and pin it in place. When I'm stitching it in place at the top edges, I'm going to back stitch back and forward a couple of times because I'm going to be using it quite a lot, putting my phone in and out. It's going to be under quite a bit of force throughout its life. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to align the edge of my patch pocket with my 1/8 inch mark on my foot, and that's what I'm going to follow right around. Okay, the patch pocket is now sewn on and we are on the final steps to getting this bag together. What I'm going to do now is turn the lining inside out, so have the right side facing me, and I'm going to put it right sides together with the main exterior, but I need to leave a little opening at the top so that I can turn my bag the right way out in just a minute. I'm going to align the side seams first and place a clip at each, and then I am going to clip the rest in place, making sure that I put pins where I want to leave the opening. To stitch the top of the bag, I'm going to be using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I want to make sure that I don't catch the ruffle in that seam allowance so that it can hang loose on the outside. That is now all stitched and I've left the opening just over here. I'm going to reach my hand inside and start pulling the bag right side out. And we just have one final touch to add to the bag. I'm getting super excited about this bag and I cannot wait to actually use it. To make my next step easier, I'm just going to press the edges at the top so that they lie flat, and then I'm going to top stitch right around. For the top stitching, to keep in line with my color scheme, I'm actually going to change the top thread out to that terracotta color, but I am going to leave the lighter color thread in the bobbin because that is what's going to show on the green side of my fabric. For my stitches to look a lot neater because it's top stitching, I'm going to lengthen them to a 3. And as I top stitch the top closed, I'm going to be closing that little opening I left when I turned the bag the right side out. So I just want to show you what these stitches look like both from the outside and the inside of the bag because I used the 2 different colored threads. I top stitched with the main facing up and my top thread is the terracotta one that you can see there. And the lining was touching the sewing machine and the bobbin thread is the one that you can see appearing right on the inside. I love how this turned out. Ruffles, ties, patch pockets and all. Especially since it cost me nothing because everything I used came from my stash today. What have you made with your scraps of fabric that you have kept in your stash? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to my channel for more. That's it from me today. Bye for now.